guys, I'm Sarah and today I'm going to show you 10 of my go-to super cheap recipes. This video was suggested to me, thank you very much, that's a great suggestion. I'm going to vary this a little bit. I've sort of got some dinner recipes, a couple of breakfast ideas and some baking type recipes that really will cost very little. The first thing that sprung to mind, for obvious reasons, I haven't done a video on making this before because it's not even really a recipe. So 2-minute noodles. They do get a bit of a bad rap, but look, it's something that we don't eat it very often, but I always have them in the pantry because they're handy to have at a pinch. $5.89 for a 10 pack. Now, if we're feeding the 6 of us, what I will normally do is I'll use about half a packet of frozen veggies, just the corn, peas, carrots type mix. $2.69 for the Value brand 1 kg packet. So that's $1.35. Put the veggies in there, start boiling them up in some water, break up the noodles. We use about 6 packets of noodles for 6 of us, which comes to $3.53. So now of course there's things you can do to jazz up 2-minute noodles, but if you're just doing that 2-minute noodles and half a packet of frozen veg, look, there's not much protein there, but it could be worse if you're in a pinch. That comes to $4.88 to feed my tribe, which means 97 cents each per serving. Now as for ones that I have actually done videos on, the other thing that came to mind almost straight away is tomato soup. I buy the 89-cent cans of tomatoes, either whole or crushed, it doesn't matter, you whiz them up anyway. So I use about 6 of those. I think in my original recipe video I actually drained out the juice from some of them. I don't do that anymore. I figure, hey, I don't really need to, it just adds more. That's fine. So that's about $5.34 for 6 cans of those. I also add about 4 decent sized carrots. I find carrots are the secret to an awesome homemade tomato soup. They just add a nice little bit of sweetness and flavour. I estimated about 244 grams worth of carrots at 73 cents. I always put an onion in there. I'm going to say an onion is about 50 cents. Now that's your 3 basic ingredients. You can just leave it at that. If you want, as I say, again, herbs, spices, if you want to. I usually put salt and pepper in. I usually head out to the garden and see what leafy greens or anything else I've got that I can chop up and throw into the mix. If we've got any leftover veg from the night before, I often just put that in. I've got one daughter who won't touch peas, she hates them. If I put a handful of peas in there, she has no idea. I grow my own garlic, so I often use that in things. I love putting garlic in tomato soup, but it's not necessary if you really are in a pinch. So with just those ingredients, that will come to $6.57 or $1.31 per bowl. Now of course, just soup, that's not going to fill you up, so the next thing I'll look at is bread. I don't find store-bought bread very filling at all. I know you can get nice loaves of bread, but you can make your own bread. You don't need a bread maker, you don't need any fancy equipment, all you need is an oven and an oven tray. You will use about 70 cents worth of flour, 35 cents worth of yeast, if you're not one of these fancy people who makes your own yeast, and about 1 cent worth of salt. So I mean, it's not bad. That is literally all you need, and you can make a really nice, lovely smelling, warm, crusty loaf of bread for $1.06. So, you know, throw that in with your soup and that comes to a total dinner of $1.51 each. The next thing is also a really super quick dinner, and that's pan pizzas. So if you've got a big frying pan that can also go into your oven, that's ideal for this. With my pizza dough, I don't bother with yeast or anything like that. I usually make 2-ingredient dough, which is self-raising flour and Greek yogurt. I make my own Greek yogurt and I'll get into that later on. But if you are on a super budget, you haven't got the Greek yogurt, you can just use water. You need about 3 cups of self-raising flour and some water. That will make your pizza bases. 62 cents it will cost you to make, well, it cost me to make 2 pizza bases, so I make 2 of them for our tribe. I use 1 onion, divvied up between them, 50 cents. I do use sausages. If you've got some really good, lovely home kill or anything like that, brilliant. You've got good sausages, then it'll be heaps better. If not, just use Hella's. Just use Hella's pre-cooks. About $10.69 a kilo at the moment at my local. And I only use about 4 sausages in total. I just chop them up, divvy them up. So that's about $2.85. And tomatoes, I use a tin of tomatoes. I don't even use the whole tin actually, divvied up between the pizzas. And mixed herbs, I allowed for a couple of tablespoons of mixed herbs because I think you kind of need that. That's about 86 cents. Now again, I usually jazz it up a bit more. I use stuff that I've got in the garden, greenery. You can either do that or not. If you've got a community garden local to you, there's nearly always something leafy and green growing. Broccoli, you can use the leaves from broccoli, you can eat the leaves from cauliflower. It's all extra nutrition. So, you know, really think about what you can use that you might normally just throw away. But of course, pizza, you've got to have cheese on it. That's not cheap. So, you know, about $1 worth of cheese per pizza. I usually try and go light on the cheese, but you need it on a pizza, don't you? But the 2 pizzas that I make comes to $7.72. So that feeds 5 of us, so that's $1.54 each. Another reasonably cheap dinner that I make is enchiladas. You don't have to have meat in them, of course. If you're on a budget, you can do it veggie. So an onion, again, 50 cents. Capsicum, now it's worth having a look in the frozen section of your supermarket if capsicums are not in season at the moment. I sort of estimated 1 capsicum was about 300 grams, and 300 grams worth of frozen capsicum at my local supermarket came to $1.55, which at the moment is cheaper than what I can buy a capsicum for. So it is always worth looking in the frozen versus fresh, you know, what you can get, and just trying to work out the price there. I use a can of chili beans, which is $2.99 at the moment. Kidney beans, $1.49. Good old can of budget tomatoes again, which is 89 cents. I use some tomato puree on top, but I mean, you could also just get some another can of tomatoes and wazz it up. That'd probably be even cheaper. But $1.89 for a can of tomato puree. I just think that's nice and thick. Often I will sprinkle cheese on top, but that's not necessary. Just omit that if you're on a budget. The tortillas themselves for the enchiladas, I think you can buy them reasonably cheap in the Mexican sort of section of your supermarket. I think value brand ones, you can get them reasonably cheap, but you literally just need flour and water to make tortillas. I often add a little bit of oil into mine just to get them a nice soft texture. Flour and water though, that's all you need. They are really quick to make, and I figured out to make 10 tortillas, which I normally do when I'm making my enchiladas, costs 87 cents. That's in itself is pretty cheap. If you're looking for a lunchtime option and you're out of bread, I do this often. I'll actually just make myself one singular tortilla, cook it on the cook it in the pan, stuff it full of stuff, lunch done. So the enchiladas altogether came to $9.28. It feeds 5 of us, so that's $1.86 each. So that there is a nice cheap dinner. Pasta. Of course, you can buy packets of dried pasta pretty cheap, although they have been going up in price. I remember the days when you used to get a packet of pasta for between 50 cents and $1. Now it's more like $1.20 to $2 plus for a packet of dried pasta. Now, I make my own pasta, it's the way I roll. To make enough to feed the 5 of us, I've never weighed it, to be honest. I suspect it'll be a bit more than the 500 gram packs of dried pasta that you normally get, but it costs me 70 cents worth of flour, and that's actually all you need, flour and water. Now, I usually put off making my homemade pasta unless I've got eggs from our chickens, because I use about 5 eggs. Now, buying 5 eggs at the moment, that's not cheap. If that's not an option, just make it with flour and water. There's nothing wrong with it, to be honest. Another option, if you're going to get really sneaky about getting veggies into your kids, you can cook up some veggies, blitz them, let them cool down completely and use them as part of the liquid. Make your pasta dough with veggies. I have done that. It works. I think I did do a video on that. I will link it all below. But anyway, just straight up, you know, a lovely bowl of fettuccine pasta, just flour and water, 70 cents, and that will feed the 5 of us easily. Put some kind of a sauce with it. Of course, you can put any kind of protein in there if you want, but I'm just going for an absolute budget recipe. Now, basically, the kind of sauce I make to go with it is very similar to my tomato soup. You know, I'll get some cans of tomatoes, grate some carrot, I'll chop up whatever kind of veggies I've got. But it's basically my tomato soup recipe halved, because it's got a ton of pasta in there and you just mix it all through. Except I might leave it a little bit more chunky with the pasta. I've sort of taken my tomato sauce recipe and halved it, because that's about what I do, about $3.29. So that dinner in total, $3.99. That's pretty cheap, 79 cents per bowl of pasta and sauce. Now, if you want to add the eggs, the cheapest eggs that I can get at the moment at the supermarket are about 57 cents each. If I'm adding the 5 eggs into there, so that's an extra $2.85. That would come to $6.84 total for that recipe, or $1.37 each. So that's still cheap. Now, I make tray bake crumpets. I've done a couple of videos on this. The first video I ever did on this channel was crumpets. It was a terrible video, so I decided to redo it in the last year. Yeah, tray bake crumpets. They're not like the sort of rubbery, not very filling ones you get from the supermarket. They are different. They're a cross between a crumpet and an English muffin, really, but whatever they are, they're yummy. Bit of milk, bit of yeast, bit of flour, bit of baking soda. I make 15 of them for $1.67. Now that's a really cheap breakfast. That's 11 cents per crumpet. We usually have about 2 each for breakfast, plus whatever toppings you want. So that's a 22-cent breakfast. Another honourable mention I will give for a breakfast option is overnight oats, or porridge. You know, 1 cup of rolled oats will cost about 22 cents. A cup of milk I think is about 30 cents. I make all my milk from powdered milk at the moment, and that works out the cheapest for us, depending on what brand you get, depending on how you mix it. So I mean, you've kind of got a 50-cent breakfast there, whether you make it as porridge or overnight oats, but of course you want to add things to it. So that's why I'm giving this an honourable mention as opposed to it being officially part of the 10, because I don't know what you want to put in with it. Golden syrup, banana, whatever. One of my daughters actually mixes peanut butter in with hers, and I think that is disgusting, but that's her prerogative. There's a few baking type recipes if you're needing to put things in the kids' lunchbox or something like that. One thing is 3 ingredient bickies. These are really cheap to make, especially if you make them with table spread, not butter. I know butter is better for you, but I'm going for cheap. So the table spread comes to about 72 cents. I'll use some sugar, which comes to about 25 cents, and about 38 cents worth of flour. Those are the 3 ingredients, and it makes 20 small bickies, or you could make larger ones, but it makes a tray full for $1.35. So, you know, that's pretty cheap for lunchbox snacks. They're versatile. You can add cocoa powder into them. You can add coconut into them, you can add chocolate chips, you can add raisins. Now another nice easy recipe is pineapple loaf. This is another 3-ingredient one. A 425 tin of crushed pineapple is about $1.59 at the moment. A couple of cups of self-raising flour, that comes to 42 cents, and a cup of sugar comes to 50 cents. That's all you need. You can refine the recipe a bit more, I'm sure, by adding an egg or whatever, but we're on a budget, you and I. So it makes a nice loaf. Chop it up into about 10 pieces, 25 cents a piece. The whole loaf or cake, depending on what size pan you make it in, comes to $2.51. So a nice cheap bit of baking there for the kids. Basic muffins, just plain basic muffins, because again, you can add anything to it. I actually really like, we go foraging for blackberries when they're in season, and I often put them in containers and put them in the freezer. If I'm doing these muffins, I'll get a couple of handfuls of frozen blackberries in and mix them in, and they look fancy, I tell you. So these muffins, basically 41 cents for the flour, 38 cents for the sugar, half a teaspoon of salt, I'm not going to add that up, that's less than a cent. Some milk, 21 cents, 33 cents for a third of a cup of oil. You do need an egg at 57 cents. $1.91, and it makes 12 muffins. Makes 12 little muffins for $1.91. So, you know, 16 cents per muffin. Eggs. There is a brand name Oregon or something like that. They do no egg replacer powder. They used to have it at the supermarket. They don't seem to have it at my local anymore. But I did a lot of experimenting with that. It worked brilliantly for most of the baking stuff that I do. Pretty much everything, it seemed to work really well. You could buy a packet of it that equated to about 66 eggs worth. You mix the powder with a bit of water, and that will come to about 10 cents for each egg that you're replacing. So instead of 57 cents for an egg, you're paying 10 cents. It's not as nutritious, of course, but you're on a mega budget. It is worth looking into. I think there are still some shops. You might have to do a bit of Googling, see where you can find it. The last thing I've got on my list is Greek yogurt. Now, there is a reason that I make Greek yogurt all the time. I don't use an Easy or anything like that. I make it using my slow cooker. I make it with powdered milk, and I use the previous batch that I made as a starter for the next batch. So literally milk is the only expense I've got. As soon as I've done a batch, milk's the one and only expense. If I have to buy some yogurt as a starter, I'll just get, I think Meadow Fresh still do just little pots of Greek yogurt. I'll just buy a little pot of it and just use part of that as a starter. It will cost about $2.27 to make 1 litre of Greek yogurt. So that's a whole heap cheaper than buying it. The advantages of making Greek yogurt are that you can incorporate it into things. You can make your 2-ingredient dough. As I say, my pizzas I normally make using Greek yogurt. You can make scrollies with them. I make cinnamon scrolls, or sometimes cheese and Vegemite scrolls, or relish scrolls, using the 2-ingredient dough, the self-raising flour Greek yogurt. I substitute sour cream for Greek yogurt if we're having nachos, or sometimes on the enchiladas that I make. We'll actually just put some Greek yogurt on that I make instead of sour cream, and it's fine. It's a perfectly legitimate replacement. And I actually like putting a wee dollop and swirling it around the tomato soup because it looks fancy and it's yummy. When you make the Greek yogurt, not only do you get a litre of Greek yogurt, but you're also left with 1 litre of whey that is left over. Now that whey you can use instead of milk in your baking. So if you go back to some of the recipes I just mentioned, the crumpets and the basic muffins both use milk. You can use the whey instead. So you're actually saving even more. You don't need to equate for the milk in your crumpets. Just put whey in it. It works really well in crumpets. That's actually my go-to. I'll make a batch of Greek yogurt, and afterwards, once I've drained out all the whey, I'll actually make a couple of batches of crumpets. I'm hoping this was of some help. I will link down any recipes that I mentioned in this video in the description below. You might have to click the see more button. I'm hoping you don't come across too many of the weeks where you're desperate for these recipes, but have fun out there and we'll catch you next week. Bye.